Some stars of a popular auction show took a break at Chiele and never returned to your screens. What really happened to them?
God, please send us a Tom Beers. I have no idea who Tom Beers is. I don't know who Tom Beers is.
In Storage Wars, the lockers weren't the only place where treasures were found. The true gems were the people themselves. Bold bidders, risk-takers, and unforgettable characters who filled every episode with laughter, tension, and heart. But if you've noticed some familiar faces missing, it's not because they walked away from the auction. Life, in the most heartbreaking way, took them when no one was watching, and their absence still feels like an empty locker, waiting to be filled. Jared Schultz and Brandy Passante. When Storage Wars first kicked off, Jared Schultz and Brandy Passante quickly became the couple everyone loved to follow. Fans enjoyed watching the way they joked with each other, balanced each other's strengths, and built a life around bidding wars and second-hand treasures. Their chemistry was so strong that they even got their own spin-off, Brandy and Jared, Married to the Job. But despite the title, the two of them were never legally married. Still, they stayed together for years, raised their children, and became a cornerstone of the franchise. But as the years went by, things began to change. By 2021, their relationship had ended. On the very first episode of Season 13, they revealed to the world that they were no longer together. And yet, in a strange twist, they continued to appear on the show side by side, no longer partners in love, but still partners in business, at least on camera. For a while, it seemed like the split had been civil. There were no public fights, no scandals, just two people moving on while still sharing the spotlight. Then came May 2021, and the headlines that shocked fans everywhere. TMZ reported that Jared was facing charges for domestic violence against Brandy. According to the story, the two had crossed paths at a bar in Orange County. Brandy had been out with friends when Jared showed up. Witnesses said she asked him to leave multiple times, but he refused. Tension quickly escalated, and the situation allegedly turned physical. Jared stayed silent, refusing to comment, which only fueled speculation. Fans were left in the dark, unsure what to believe, until Brandy herself spoke up, not in words, but in a post that said more than a press conference ever could. On Instagram, she revealed a tattoo on her wrist with a single word, "Free." In the caption, she explained that it symbolized surviving something that could have broken her. She shared her gratitude for making it out of a situation that so many others never escape, and she spoke of finally finding peace and safety. For fans who had once cheered for Brandy and Jared as the perfect couple of Storage Wars, the truth was painful. Their story became a reminder that even behind the laughter, success, and television fame, real life can be messy, heartbreaking, and dangerous. Mo Prigoff. For years, viewers loved watching Mo Prigoff on Storage Wars. Texas, the man with the bold outfits, the quick jokes, and the fearless attitude. On screen, he looked like nothing could ever shake him. But behind that colorful personality was a man with depth far beyond television. Mo wasn't just a bidder, he was a doctor, a businessman, a collector, and a family man. Morris Mo Prigoff didn't just admire beautiful things, he understood them. For more than 30 years, he searched for rare furniture, unique art, and objects that carried hidden stories. After spending a decade selling around Dallas, he finally opened his own store, River Regency Modern. With his young manager Robert helping him run the shop, Mo balanced business with his medical career as a podiatrist. His sharp eye and stylish flair made him unforgettable both at the auction and in everyday life. On the show, Mo often teamed up with Mary Padian. Together, they became fan favorites, with Mary later moving on to the California series, while Mo stayed in Texas, where medicine remained his main focus. Fellow bidders called him the Doc, and for 3 seasons, his humor and charm made Storage Wars, Texas something special. But off-camera, Mo's life was even richer. He loved music, art, gardening, teaching, swimming, and basketball. He loved to travel and believed in finding joy in meaningful things. And through it all, he never stopped cherishing his wife, Mikola, whom he always called my wife for life. Their bond lasted 19 years, and in his final chapter, she stood by him through every struggle. Sadly, Mo's vibrant journey slowed after he fell ill. He battled his condition for 6 long years, showing the same resilience he carried everywhere in life. But on March 4th, 2021, the world lost Maurice Mo Prigo. To fans, he wasn't just another cast member. He was the man who brought color, laughter, and class to a world of dust and forgotten treasures. And that's how he'll always be remembered. Gunter Neoda. The Storage Wars family lost someone who not only brought warmth, but humor and genuine kindness to the screen. Gunter Neoda, who had been part of the show since its 4th season, passed away at the age of 67 after battling serious health problems caused by lung cancer. His son, Rene, who many fans also know from the show, shared the heartbreaking news through an emotional video he posted on social media. He explained that his father's condition had worsened everything, saying that about 6 months earlier, Gunter had been told he had lung cancer. He said his father had been smoking for around 30 years, and even though he had stopped for a while, the damage had already been done. In the video, Rene explained that his father had holes in his lungs, and his body just couldn't handle it anymore. Gunter passed away in his sleep while in the hospital, and his youngest son, Ricky, was there with him during those final hours in Salt Lake City, Utah. Rene said the reason he chose to share this news publicly was that so many people had grown to love his father over the years. Gunter was one of those rare people on television who didn't get hate or negativity from viewers. Everyone on set liked working with him, and fans always looked forward to seeing him on screen. Rene went on to thank everyone for the kind messages and said they had kept his father's condition private because they truly believed he would get better. They didn't expect things to end like this. Gunter had joined the show a few years after Rene and his wife Casey had already made a name for themselves as the Bargain Hunters, running their thrift store in Poway, California. Gunter had joined his son in Season 8, and soon enough, he became a fan favorite. Gunter called himself a passionate photographer and a bass player. Over the years, he played with Michael Schenker, Leslie West, and Pat Travers. Gunter also appeared in a few movies, including Do Not Disturb and The Haunting of Death Valley Junction. He was born in Austria and moved to Las Vegas in 1990, where he built a life for himself and his family. According to reports, Gunter had recently flown to Utah for emergency surgery, and even though his family hoped things would turn around, the illness had already gone too far. What makes this even harder for fans is that Gunter had just started to become a bigger part of the show. People were getting to know him better, and while his time on Storage Wars may have been brief compared to others, the way he touched people's hearts left a lasting memory. Dave Hester.
Catcher for years in the auction facility, and as I would catch the bids from the auction.
What if Storage Wars was never just about fun and drama? What if behind all the shouting, the auctions, and the laughter, something much darker was lurking? That's the kind of question many fans have been asking after watching the show for years. Because over time, it hasn't just been about who finds the rarest treasures or who makes the most money. It's also been about what kept happening to the cast once the cameras stopped rolling. Little by little, familiar faces began to face serious problems. Some got sick, some suffered accidents, and a few came dangerously close to losing their lives. That's when whispers of a Storage Wars curse began spreading among fans. And right in the middle of all those rumors stood one of the loudest voices in the series, Dave Hester. Dave wasn't just another bidder, he was the man behind the legendary "You Up" shout, the star who could spark drama with every glance and keep viewers glued to their screens. But in 2012, Dave dropped a bombshell that shook the show's very foundation. He claimed Storage Wars was fake, that lockers were filled on purpose to boost excitement. He didn't just talk, he went to court and filed a lawsuit against A&E. The network quickly pushed him out, but eventually they brought him back. Maybe they realized the show couldn't survive without his energy, or maybe they thought fans would forget his accusations. But life had an even harsher battle waiting for him. Not long after returning, Dave suffered a terrifying hemorrhagic stroke. His blood pressure and untreated sleep apnea caused bleeding in his brain. One moment, he was the sharp, loud star of Storage Wars, and the next, he was lying in a hospital bed, unable to move or even speak. For a time, doctors weren't sure he'd make it at all. Against all odds, Dave survived. His recovery was slow, painful, and uncertain, but fans were relieved to see him alive. Yet his near-death experience only deepened the belief that something strange was happening to Storage Wars stars. Because Dave wasn't the only one facing such tragedies. Others, too, were dealing with accidents, illness, and heartbreak. And so the question still remains. If there really is a curse on the show, who might be the next to face it? Brandon Sheets. Brandon Sheets was known for being right beside his dad, Daryl, on Storage Wars, and the two made a strong team. In 2017, however, things changed suddenly when Brandon was let go from the show. The reason for this, as claimed by the producers, was as a result of budget cuts. Yet his dad stayed on, which left Brandon needing to figure out what to do next. As a result, he tried different jobs, including selling real estate. He ended up working as a truck driver for UPS, which seemed like just another job, until one day something terrifying happened that almost cost him his life. Brandon shared what happened in a post on Instagram in early 2022, where he posted a picture of the crashed truck and explained what happened that night. He explained that he had been asleep in the back of the UPS semi-truck, and his partner was off that day, so someone else was filling in. While Brandon was asleep, this co-driver crashed into another truck while going 70 miles per hour. Brandon explained that waking up felt like a bomb had exploded, and everything around him was chaos. He was rushed to a hospital in Texas before being sent back home to Arizona to start healing. Although he only had minor physical injuries, he made it clear that the experience was deeply upsetting and that UPS didn't support him the way they should have. According to him, the company didn't give him any workers' compensation and didn't even pay for the things he lost in the crash. What made this worse was knowing it all could have been avoided if better safety training had been given, especially for drivers working in teams on long road trips. He ended his message by saying everyone needed to work together to raise safety awareness, and that big companies like UPS should take more care of their people. What makes Brandon's story even more strange is that he's not the only one from Storage Wars to go through something like this. Not too long before that, his father, Daryl Sheets, faced a serious health scare, and this wasn't just a small issue. Daryl, who many fans remember as the gambler on the show, had been part of Storage Wars since the beginning. After taking a short break when the show paused for a while, he came back in Season 13 and kept going through Seasons 14 and 15. However, when Season 16 was announced for June 7, 2025, fans noticed that Daryl wasn't listed as part of the new cast. Now, as this was happening, some people online started spreading false rumors that he had passed away, but his social media showed that he was still alive. And not only that, but in 2023, he even started a business called Show Me Your Junk in Havasu, Arizona. However, back in 2019, Daryl had a very severe health emergency that put him in the hospital. At the time, he said he had been sick for 3 months. Not only that, he had a mild heart attack later on. In a post which he later deleted, he explained that doctors told him he had congestive heart failure along with something very serious going on in one of his lungs. It was a lot to deal with all at once, and the fact that it had built up over months made it even scarier because he hadn't seen it coming. He ended up needing surgery, and 1 month later, he gave an update saying his heart function was back to 40%, which meant it was getting stronger. It also meant he could take off the defibrillator vest he had to wear after the heart scare. But not everything was all right at the time. Daryl mentioned that he wasn't completely safe yet, since his heart was still not at full strength. Yet he felt hopeful that things would be better with time. Dan Dodson. Dan Dodson had already built a strong name for himself in the auction world long before Storage Wars ever came along. He learned how auctions worked and went on to start his own company called American Auctioneers. Not long after, his wife Laura joined him in business, and they worked side by side, becoming one of the most recognizable couples on the show. Just like Jared and Brandy, Dan and Laura were often seen together running auctions and getting the crowd going. Everything seemed to be just fine until something terrible happened in 2014 that could have changed everything forever. It started as just a normal day, but Dan started feeling unwell. He complained of a strong headache and started mixing up his words in a way that didn't make sense, which made Laura immediately realize something was very wrong. She looked at him and noticed his eyes had rolled back, his legs were giving out under him, and his skin color shifted from red and purple to a scary shade of bluish-green. As soon as she noticed this, she called for help and stayed by his side as things got worse very quickly. What Dan was going through was not just a headache or some random fainting spell. It was 2 brain aneurysms happening at once. Most people don't make it out of something like that, and for a moment, it looked like Dan might not pull through, but somehow he did. Doctors later said one reason he made it was because there wasn't too much bleeding inside his head when it all happened, which gave them a better chance of treating him. His neurologist, Dr. M. Asif Taki, explained that Dan's surviving something so serious was rare but possible. Once he was stable, Dan stayed in the hospital for a while, and Laura was there with him every step of the way. While lying in that hospital bed, something changed in him. He turned to Laura and said, "Guess what? I'm a non-smoker now." That moment showed how close he came to losing everything and how he didn't want to waste another second doing things that could hurt his health. Laura Dodson. After everything Dan Dodson had already been through, including the time he nearly lost his life from a brain aneurysm, you would think the worst was behind him. Unfortunately, more pain was still waiting just around the corner. This life-threatening incident shook both him and his wife, Laura, in a way that no parent ever wants to imagine, because they almost lost their son, Garrett Dodson. Before that, Dan had already suffered another strange and painful moment when one of their French bulldogs suddenly attacked him and almost bit off one of his fingers. However, what happened in 2020 was far more terrifying and far more heartbreaking. Their son Garrett, who was just 22 years old, had traveled to Arizona to visit his girlfriend. And during that trip, something horrible happened that changed everything in a matter of seconds. While Garrett was in Arizona, he was shot, and the damage was so terrible. His ability to call for help himself was a miracle. Laura later told the reporters that Garrett dialed 911 even while he was badly hurt and barely hanging on. Yet when he was rushed to a nearby hospital, things were getting worse fast, and the doctors soon realized they couldn't treat him there. They had to move quickly and fly him out to Las Vegas because of how serious his condition had become. Laura explained that the bullet had torn into one of the largest veins in Garrett's body, the vena cava. This caused him to bleed on the inside. As a result of how dire things were, a doctor had to jump onto the operating table and use his hands to hold everything together while trying to stop the bleeding. As he was doing this, he kept massaging Garrett's heart to keep him alive during the flight to Las Vegas. And all this happened while Garrett was still in a very fragile state. Once they got to Las Vegas, the medical team took him straight into surgery. And somehow, against all odds, the doctors were able to fix the damage and save his life. Dan later said how thankful they were because many people came together that day to keep their son alive. They knew it could have ended in a much different way if even one thing had gone wrong. As for the person who hurt Garrett, the police later arrested a man named Garrett Wilder. He was charged with multiple crimes, including 2 counts of aggravated assault and disorderly conduct with a weapon, along with other serious charges. Brandy Passante. When Brandy Passante first appeared in the very first season of Storage Wars, Nobody expected how fast her name would grow. She became one of the most recognized faces on the show because of the bond she shared with her partner, Jared Schultz. Their chemistry was so natural that A&E decided to give them their own spin-off in 2014, which they called Brandy and Jared, Married to the Job. This move pushed her even further into the spotlight, but this dose of fame came with its downsides. In 2020, Brandy talked about something she had kept for a long time. When she sat down for an interview on The Dad Diary with Danny Jordan, she shared how fame had affected her. She mentioned that, as people started to recognize her more in public, things started getting strange. She started getting letters that didn't feel like fan mail. Some of them were so disturbing that they made her worry about her safety and her children's. She also mentioned that it got so bad at one point that she had to move into a gated community with full-time security just to feel safe. As a result, she had to talk to a therapist because everything happening around her started to take a toll. It made her scared to go outside, scared to be seen, and she stopped living normally for a while. But with time and with help, she said things started getting better, and she began to feel more like herself again. But this was just the tip of the iceberg on the list of terrible things that happened to her. Who else on the Storage Wars crew suffered a terrible near-death experience? Let's find out. Barry Weiss. Barry Weiss became popular because of the show Storage Wars, even though he had never bought a single storage unit before that. He joined the show thanks to Tom Beers, who had known him for years and was also one of the producers. But unlike most people on the show who wanted to make money from the things they found, Barry was different. He just loved looking for strange and interesting things that caught his eye. Sometimes he even brought psychics to the auctions just to guess what might be hidden inside the units. And he didn't mind spending money on unusual items, even if they weren't valuable. He stood out with his West Coast chopper glasses, skeleton gloves, and those wild cars like the chicken-themed one he drove to auctions. People liked him because he didn't act like the others. So when he stopped appearing on the show, a lot of fans were left disappointed and wondering why he left so suddenly. Around April 2019, however, Barry got into a terrible motorcycle crash with his friend in Los Feliz, Los Angeles. They ran straight into a car, and the crash was so bad that they were both rushed to the hospital. Barry's injuries were much worse, and they left people genuinely worried. After the accident, rumors started going around that he was no longer around. But that's about it. Now that you've seen the stories behind these unforgettable Storage Wars stars, Mark Balelo. Mark Balelo, who became widely known through the show Storage Wars, was found inside his car one early Monday morning, and sadly, he was no longer alive. His car was parked inside the garage of his business, Balelo Inc., which was located in Simi Valley, California. When the officials arrived, they confirmed he had passed away after breathing in carbon monoxide and exhaust fumes. He was just 40 years old, and even though the details were difficult to accept, everything pointed to the fact that he had ended his own life. Mark had always stood out on television, not just because of the work he did, but also because of how he carried himself. People who watched Storage Wars will remember him as Rico Suave, a nickname that matched the way he dressed and acted during the auctions. He often wore flashy clothes and showed up with stacks of cash, ready to outbid anyone if he thought something valuable was hidden inside a storage locker. Behind the scenes, however, things may have been different. Just 2 days before he was found, Mark had been arrested at his auction business for having methamphetamines and for being under the influence. He had a court date already set for February 19th, which means he was already dealing with serious legal trouble, and this likely made everything feel heavier than he could handle. Although he got out of the situation without facing serious time, it had a seemingly negative impact on Balelo's mental well-being. This was so heavy that he asked his fiancée, Elizabeth Metsidis, to keep him company at his office during that time, since he felt mentally unstable. Elizabeth left after the visit, thinking he was better. Unfortunately, they found his body the next day. Mark wasn't just a TV personality, He was born in Portugal and spent his early years in Brazil until he was about 14. After moving to the United States, he began building a life for himself from the ground up. Before he ever stepped into the spotlight, he owned a video game store called Game Exchange. Later in 2011, he opened his auction house, which allowed him to step into the world of buying and selling forgotten or abandoned items. Back in 2011, Mark made headlines for helping return a very rare comic book to actor Nicolas Cage. The comic was Action Comics 1, the very first issue that introduced Superman back in 1938. That comic had been missing for more than 10 years after it was stolen from Cage's home. Mark found it while going through the contents of a storage locker he had purchased. And when the truth came out about what he had discovered, the comic's value, which was close to $1 million, wasn't the only thing people talked about. Many were impressed that he made sure the comic got back to its original owner, and that story stayed tied to his name ever since. But now, all those stories are being remembered with sadness, because the truth is, no one genuinely knows what someone is going through on the inside, no matter how confident or cheerful they may seem in public. When officers arrived at the scene, they found Mark inside his car, and even though help was called, he was not breathing anymore. The official cause of his demise was listed as asphyxia from breathing in the fumes. We have to ask, whose loss hit you the hardest? And do you believe there's more to this show than what meets the eye? Maybe even something lurking behind the cameras? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your take. If this video left an impression, give it a like, share it with friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that dive deeper than the auctions and the drama. Before you go, take a moment to explore the other videos on your screen. Every story has its secrets,